So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our Living Waters Euro Apologetics, Evangelism, and Equipping program called Answers. We've been doing this now for over a decade. More and more Christians are joining our studies from all over the world. So by joining us, you get to be live with our speakers and you get to ask questions after the presentation. If you know anyone who would be interested in these studies, please share this link with them. They just need to go to answers.livingwaterseu.com to register, and that is it. Everyone is welcome. These studies are totally free, but we want to thank those who've been generously supporting and donating to Living Waters Europe month after month to make this possible. And now we come to the topic of today's teaching. Halloween. How should Christians look at Halloween? What is it? Where did it come from? And why is this topic significant for Christians today? For this, we have a very well-known and popular apologist, Bodie Hodge, and who will be going through this study to help us understand how Christians should react to this. Bodie is Ken Ham's son-in-law and worked for Answers in Genesis for many, many years. Amongst many things, he has co-hosted Answers News at Answers in Genesis and published or co-authored or contributed to many, many books. They're right there listed in front of you. And more significantly, for today's topic, he wrote this booklet called A Biblical and Historical Look at Halloween. He now runs his own ministry where you can get all these books and booklets called Biblical Authority Ministries, where you can see all this stuff and get whatever you need. Thank you, Bodie, for being with us today, for joining us on Tuesday and Thursday. We're very excited and looking forward to hearing what you have to say to us. So I'll now hand over to you. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, hopefully the screen and everything comes up just fine. And this is exciting. I love looking at the subject of Halloween. My title is Halloween, Paganism in the Bible. So, there's a lot to this. And when it comes to Halloween, it's popular in Europe. It's popular in the United States. Believe it or not, it's popular in places I didn't even think it would be popular in going around the world. But one of the questions I get all the time when I start off with Halloween is, why orange? Why is orange the color of Halloween? And I did a lot of research on it and come to find out it was simply because of a pumpkin. That's all it is. It's because of a pumpkin. So I'm wearing orange today, I guess, in honor of pumpkins around the world. But I'll tell you who loves Halloween. Here's who loves it: the stores. Stores love it. They get billions of dollars every year just from Halloween decorations, candy, costumes, you name it. And a lot of this stuff is quite questionable. You know who doesn't like it? Insurance companies. Insurance companies, they just dread when Halloween rolls around. Here in the United States, and I'm sure it's like this in various parts of the world, you see things like arson and theft and vandalism. You have to deal with pins and poison, things like that in candy, the occult activity. There's crime spikes. Just to give you an idea, this was a news item just from a couple of years ago, but we get these news items every year. This was fentanyl poisoning put in candy. It's just crazy. I've actually had pins stuck in some of my candy when I was a kid. See, I grew up in a moderately Christian home. We didn't know much. They just treated Halloween like it was Labor Day or Memorial Day or any other day. Oh, go out and get some candy. They didn't think twice about it. And one time I got some candy and I came back and my dad grabbed all my candy and started going through it. And I'm like, what are you doing? And apparently some of the kids I was with, they found a pin in one of their little candy bars. And lo and behold, my dad was searching through and he found a pin in one of mine as well. So he took all my candy and threw it out. And it was like passing a kidney stone for a kid. It's like, you just took my candy and threw it out. What are you doing? And, I realized, oh, yeah, I guess I get it. But at the same time, Dad, I'm sure I could spit the pins out if there were anything like that. But, so it really does happen. I actually had my house broken into on Halloween when I moved out to Answers in Genesis. That very first year I was out there, left for a few hours, came back, somebody broken in and taken an Arrowhead collection. And they took a DVD player and all sorts of stuff. They even took a big old set of Christian CDs. So maybe they listened to them and read the lyrics and got saved and repented of all that. But who knows? But yeah, we do see a lot of examples of crime spikes, particularly on Halloween. It happens everywhere around here. Boston releases their crime statistics almost every year. And one year I took a screenshot and boom, you can see, if you look at that chart there on the left side, there's this one massive spike, 50% higher than everything else. And that is crime spikes on Halloween. It really does happen a lot. But I want to look at Halloween in a different perspective today. I want to step back and I want to start with the Bible. I want to use the Bible as our absolute authority and our framework by which we look at Halloween. And so let's just think about this for a second. What is biblically wrong with this picture? I know a lot of people might look at it and go, oh, those are aspects and elements of Halloween. Boo, scary, ooh, we got to watch out for that. Now, actually, the thing that's biblically wrong is they're out of order. The pumpkin should be first, the moon should be second, the bat, then the cat, if you follow the created order. The plants were created first, then the sun, moon, and stars, then the flying and sea creatures, then, of course, the land animals like the cat. But, I've had people, they have this mindset. They see these images, and it's automatically associated with Halloween. We need to be careful of letting the world have that sort of stuff. All these things were created by God originally. So all of these things were originally very good. Now, Adam and Eve sinned against God. Things aren't all very good, and that's why we have cats. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of black cats crossing your path, and that's bad luck and stuff like that. I don't believe any of that sort of thing. Although when I was a kid, I was riding a bicycle right in front of my grandma's house. I'm zipping down the road, and way up ahead of me, I saw this black cat run across my path, and I'm like, I don't believe that sort of stuff. As my bike gets down there, that cat ran back out. Front tire hit the cat. I went flying off the bike. I remember being in the air and I skidded right along the pavement. Cat didn't like it either, got up and took off. Oh, it was horrible. I had to push the bike back and I'm bleeding. It was terrible. But that was just a particular instance. But when it comes to Halloween, there's a lot of pagan aspects and elements that are associated with it. Just to give you an idea, jack-o'-lanterns, trick-or-treating, costume masks, ghost stories, obviously, bobbing for apples even. Black cats crossing your path kind of a thing. These all actually have pagan elements and aspects in their roots for some of these customs. So I think we do need to be discerning and careful about some of those sorts of things. So it's one thing to look out into the world and see good things that God created that people are trying to associate with Halloween. There's another trying to look at those pagan aspects and elements and trying to incorporate that into your worldview and the way that you live as a Christian. So what exactly is paganism? I know I've thrown that term out there a few times. The official definition is a polytheistic or pantheistic nature worshiping religion. So that doesn't help much. Well, let's break this down a little bit. Poly means many, theistic means God. So any religion that has many gods in it, think of Greek mythology, think of Baal worship, think of Egyptian mythology or Norse or Germanic mythology. Any of those types of religions have a whole bunch of gods. They are a form of paganism. The other form of paganism is pantheistic religions. Religions that say basically nature is all that there is, or the universe is all that there is. Basically, you just bow down to the universe as opposed to, say, bowing down to God. There's no real God in those types of religions. The universe itself is seen as God. So the point is, paganism is not one religion, but it's an overarching understanding of a multitude of religions. So yeah, it includes the mythological, it includes Wicca, witchcraft, and that's very popular nowadays. Harry Potter has helped boost it. Back in the old days, we had Bewitched and stuff like that, and people were influenced by those sorts of things. You have the occult. I've had people ask me, what about Eastern religions like Hinduism? Hinduism is actually considered something a little different. It's considered Indian paganism, which is different from standard paganism. Just in short form, Indian paganism is unique in that all their supposed gods are actually manifestations of one god, Brahman. And so it's a little bit different than, say, the other forms of paganism. So yeah, there's some crossover, but they are different. Any religion that has ancestor worship, think of Shinto. Fact is, a lot of the mythologies are a form of ancestor worship as well. But also, look at this. Any religion that basically worships nature says that nature is all that there is. Now, bear in mind, that includes this atheistic evolutionary worldview that's all around our corners. I mean, it's sitting in universities, it's sitting in textbooks, and yet that is just a pagan religion that's being included. Consider Carl Sagan. He ran an old series called Cosmos. More recently, Neil deGrasse Tyson ran a more recent series of it. He was famous for this statement that opened the program: the cosmos is all that is or ever was or ever will be. That's a pantheistic statement. That's essentially paganism right there front and center. Well, let's look a little bit more at Halloween itself and how it got started, particularly here in the United States. It actually came from Europe over to the United States, and it was brought over primarily by a lot of Scots and Irish who migrated in the mid-1800s all the way up through the early 1900s. See, Halloween was largely unknown in the United States until probably about the late 1800s it started getting going, but the early 1900s, it just exploded in the culture. And so, I mean, it's just, like I said, we're getting billions of dollars in sales every year just in the United States, on this side of the pond, that is. So, I mean, there's a massive amount of it. So a lot of the Scots, Irish, and several other groups, they had this old Celtic festival that was celebrated called Samhain. I'll talk more about that here in a moment. But who are these Celts? If you look biblically, you know, when we think biblically here, where did the Celts come from? Well, the Celts actually largely came from Noah's great-grandson Gomer. So you have Noah, Japheth, and then Gomer. Variations of his name is Gaul or Gael, Galatia. Those are actually variations of the name Gomer. France, the ancient name for France is Gaul. That's actually the name of it. And some of these different groups, Port of Gaul, Portugal, or Galatia. Some of these guys ended up back in Turkey, a little region of them. Paul wrote to the Galatians there. So they actually dominated many parts of Northwest Europe. And of course, they intermixed with other people. So you might think, oh, okay, the Celts came out of Gomer. Well, it's actually more complicated than that. If you know much about English history and the British Isles and Ireland, there's a lot of things that are going on. Some other people that came in there were the Angles and the Saxons and the Jutes. And they come out of Gomer's son Ashkenaz. So it's a different line, both out of Gomer, though. So Ashkenaz is the ancient name for Germany from the Jews. A lot of Jews that ended up in that particular area after AD 70, when the Romans came in and obliterated Judea, they became known as the Ashkenazi Jews. They still use that name even today. A lot of them have migrated back toward Israel. But a lot of these guys end up in the British Isles up there in those certain areas as well. Some of Magog's descendants ended up there. The Scots and the Irish both have ancient lineages that go back to Magog. The Irish actually have 3 different lineages that all go back to Magog. Of course, a lot of Magog's descendants went up and settled north of the Black Sea. So we have others in here. The last one I want to tell you about is Tubal, one of Noah's grandsons, Tubal. A lot of his descendants ended up in Spain. The Greeks actually called Tubal Ibers. That was their name for him when he came out of the Tower of Babel. A lot of these guys had variations in names. And so that's where the name the Iberian Peninsula comes from. That's anciently known as the land of Tubal. Well, some of Tubal's descendants migrated on up and have done some intermixing up there. A lot of Tubal's descendants also went north, went out to Central Asia, to Bolsk, Russia. Actually still reflects the name in the Tubal River up there and so forth. But I don't want to give you a big Tower of Babel lesson, but this just gives you an idea of some of the players that are going on with Halloween before it came over to the United States. If you want to know more about some of these different people groups and the archaeology of the Tower of Babel, I do have a book on that subject. And a lot of these maps, you'll find those in there with a little bit more detail as well. So let's look more at these ancient Celts. The ancient Celts had a festival called Samhain. The Druid festival, the Druids were like the priestly class. They were like the upper class of these ancient Celts. They had a festival called Samhain. It looks like Samhain, but it's pronounced Samhain. We have records of it going back about 2,000 years ago. Some of the Roman records, Strabo made some comment on it and so forth. So there was a number of them that would let us know that, hey, this was an actual event. This was an actual festival going on. Essentially, it was a Day of the Dead. And so they had sacrifices of animals and plants and sometimes even of people, according to some of the records that we have. Supposedly, this was to honor the dead. A little bit more about those Druids. They were essentially the religious leaders and the scholars who had emerged as the elite in Britain and Ireland and some of these different areas up through there. They deviated into a path of paganism with similarities to Hinduism. They were polytheistic, different from the Hindus, of course, although they did have reincarnation and they did have ancestor worship. So these Druids became very popular around 700 BC, although their roots extend back farther back, but by about 2,000 years ago, they were actually quite prominent. So a little bit more about the Druids. They tended to have their special meetings in groves, caves, remote valleys that they held sacred. One of the things that they did is they took over really ancient places like Stonehenge or Woodhenge, and they would utilize those places as well. But a lot of those were actually built initially by some of the people coming out of Babel right away. Like I said, the Druids are much later than that, only about 700 BC or so. One of the things that I thought was very interesting is that they claim to be descendants of Dis. Dis Pater. Pater means father, Father Dis, basically. And Dis is the equivalent god to Pluto or to Tubal. And so you can see that name, Tubal, interacting in there as well. This is basically Noah's grandson. So they're actually giving you a descent from Noah, whether they realize they did that or not. Okay, there's the Samhain festival. How does that become Halloween? Well, there's actually a history to this name. So if you go back, this Druid Day of the Dead was quite popular. And it was popular for a long time as Christianity is starting to grow and explode throughout Europe. By the AD 600s, the church had this festival that they celebrated called All Saints' Day. And that was originally done on May 13th, and that was to honor the saints. Now, because there was so much stuff going on with this Day of the Dead, and it just kept persisting, they decided to take All Saints' Day and move it to the exact same day as that Samhain festival, November 1st, that Day of the Dead. So they move All Saints' Day over there in the AD 700s on November 1st. Now, the day before that became known as All Hallows Evening or All Hallows Eve, the evening before All Saints' Day. So you kind of have a 2-day thing at that particular point, but you can see where the name Halloween actually comes from as a result of this All Saints' Day and this All Hallows Eve, the evening before that. So that was just shortened to All Hallows Eve or All Hallows Even or Halloween, simply the way we call it today. So the problem was you have an alternative holiday, and then you have this pagan Day of the Dead, and they're at the same time, what happens is they start mixing together. And as a result of that, a lot of people in the church said, how about we just have All Souls Day on November 2nd, and we'll just make it a 3-day festival that kind of incorporates all of it together. And so that's essentially what happened in the mid-1700s. And boom, you have a 3-day festival. What survived to today is Halloween, the first day. All Saints' Day and All Souls' Day have very little popularity, even down into the modern age here. Now, this actually relates to the Reformation. A lot of Christians celebrate Reformation Day on October 31st, and there's a reason for that. The 95 Theses that were nailed to the door at Wittenberg was done on October 31st. And the reason that you would do that, the church door was like the bulletin board of the ancient times. If you wanted to get your son married off, you got up, hey, my son needs a wife. Let's put it on the bulletin board. I have a son that's getting to that age. I don't know. But what they would do is they would put that up there. So the 95 Theses were put up there that day because the next day, everyone's coming to church. Like nowadays, it's Christmas and Easter that people show up at church. Back then, it was All Saints' Day. And so you put something on the door of the church, everybody's going to see it. You're going to reach your maximum audience. And so there is a connection to that. If you guys want to know a little bit more about the reformers, what they believed about, say, the age of the earth or whatever it might be, a friend of mine, Dr. Joel Beakey, actually wrote up a really good booklet on this. It's quite easy to digest and get through, but it is pretty powerful. Aren't there other cultures that have a Day of the Dead? Now, there's more than you might think. I remember looking at this when I first heard Day of the Dead, I automatically thought of Mexico. But you go look back in ancient times, there's a lot of places that have a Day of the Dead. Rome has one. It was actually a multiple-day festival. It was called Feralia, and it ended in Parentalia, so it stretched that whole time. That was their Day of the Dead. And it was about the same time as this Celtic Day of the Dead, so they actually fueled each other. They matched and went well with one another. Like I said, Mexico is well known for it. Disney did a movie called Coco, which is based on the Day of the Dead. We see all sorts of movies and different things that happen on these different Days of the Dead. But you go down through this list, host of people have them. Just here in North and South America, the Aztec, Olmec, Iroquois, Bolivians, Brazil, they all have one. You flip over to Asia, they have their Days of the Dead. China has what's called the Ghost Festival. Japan has the Bon Festival, or Obon, more technically. Vietnam, Nepal, Korea, Hindi. They have it over there, the Hindi people in India, Philippines. And I'm just giving you a small taste of it. What's fascinating is that many of these are about the same time of the year. That blows my mind. When I first heard that, I thought, there's got to be a connection here. There just has to be. And so you start looking at these different Days of the Dead. They were to honor the dead, the ancestors, the souls. They'd oftentimes have sacrifices. It was a time to remember sins. Most of them, like I said, were at the end of summer, mid-fall. A lot of them were very, very close to one another. And I thought, oh, boy, I wonder if this goes all the way back to when all the cultures were connected and they separated to go around the world. I was thinking this goes back as far as Babel. And so I thought, wow, the cultures had to be connected going all the way back. Now they all have sacrifice. Hold it. Noah had sacrifices after the flood. I tell you what, my mind was just rattling. I thought, oh boy, this could be the original source. And so I started to do a little bit more research. Come to find out, other scholars had already done that work. All the way back in 1931, a scholar here writing in the Bible League Quarterly, John Ukehart, pointed out the connections to the flood sacrifices as far back as 1931, soon after the holiday of Halloween gained prominence in the United States. So he's already connecting it all the way back, not just to Babel, but to the sacrifices after the flood. We also see Alfred Waywinkle. He was a professor, and he wrote for Concordia Seminary and taught there. He realized that nations throughout the world had a similar Day of the Dead, and he directly related this to the flood of Noah's day. So he has their sacrificing going back to Babel, going all the way back to the flood sacrifices. So is the event of Noah's sacrifice really where the Day of the Dead really originates? It's possible. It's a time when there was sacrifice to cover sins, a reminder of why death reigns in this sin-cursed and broken world. It was a spiritual time, a time when people remembered a disaster. The global flood took virtually the entire population. Could Halloween's roots extend back this far? Yeah, it's possible. No doubt about it. Now, if it goes back to the flood sacrifices, it goes back to sacrifice before that. So is there a relationship that goes from sacrifice from Noah's day all the way back to the Garden of Eden? That brings us to the early chapters of the Bible, the very early chapters of it. See, originally, God made everything perfect. Deuteronomy 32:4, every work of God is perfect. That's what we expected from a perfect God. At the end of the creation week, God declared everything very good. It really was perfect. But when Adam and Eve sinned against God, things changed. God cursed the ground. He cursed the animals. He sentenced man to die. And he sacrificed the first creature to cover Adam and Eve. But of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you shall not eat of it, for in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. You will begin to die. You will start to die, is what that means in Hebrew. And that's exactly what's happened with Adam and Eve. They ate from the fruit. Of course, the fruit, we don't know what it looked like. I have different images of it in here, but I just want people to realize it's not an apple. Adam and Eve didn't eat an apple. It was some type of real fruit, though. But the Lord sacrificed animals. This is the institution of sacrifice right here in Genesis 3:21. Also for Adam and his wife, the Lord God made tunics of skin and clothed them. The Lord sacrificed animals to cover that sin. That's the first recorded death of anything in Scripture, animals as a direct result of human sin. Now, me and others, we oftentimes picture this as a lamb. We do this on purpose. We do this as a foreshadow of Jesus Christ, who's called the Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. But I've had people say, but if God made the world perfect and it's all very good, why do we see all this death, bloodshed, and suffering? That's where you got to take them back to early pages of Genesis and explain, hey, the reason death and suffering exist today, whether it's tsunamis, earthquakes, lightning strikes, or just loved ones that die in car wrecks or whatever it might be, we need to remember God made it perfect. It's because of man's sin that the world is like this. And I think that's powerful when we're out witnessing to people, especially on Halloween, because a lot of people ask that question. They think God made the world just like it is right now. No, he made it perfect. It's because of man's sin the world is like this. And that's why it's so important for us to get back to the early pages of the Bible. It's because of man's sin that death and suffering came into the world. And we see that all throughout Scripture. Adam died, Seth died, Enoch died. You go all the way through here, they all died except Enoch. Enoch was taken to heaven without death. The other was Elijah that was taken up to heaven in a whirlwind. But at the end of the book of Genesis, so Joseph died. But you see, that institution of sacrifice right there in Genesis chapter 3 was mimicked. Abel did this in the course of time, which meant it was a regular thing that was going on. Abel offered sacrifices. Cain didn't. His wasn't acceptable because he didn't offer a blood sacrifice. Noah offered sacrifices as well. So Abel offers them. Noah offers these sacrifices in Genesis 8:20. We see Abraham offer sacrifices. We see the Israelites offer sacrifices. But that's all pointing to Jesus Christ, who's the ultimate and final sacrifice. That's why we don't have to sacrifice today. The infinite Son of God took the infinite punishment from the infinite Father, and his sacrifice was sufficient once for all. We don't have to sacrifice animals anymore. Besides, animals could only cover that sin. They couldn't truly satisfy God's wrath on sin. Only the infinite Son of God, who is the second person of the triune God, he could take that punishment from the infinite Father. And that satisfies God's wrath upon sin. That's what makes salvation possible. Hebrews 9:26. Jesus has appeared to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself. He is that ultimate and final sacrifice. Hebrews 9:12. He did this once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. 2 Corinthians 5:21. For he made him who knew no sin to be sin for us. And then, of course, we know that for those who love one another, when we follow Jesus Christ, the blood of Jesus Christ, the Son cleanses us from all sin. It's amazing when we step back and think about what God has done for us. And that's important when we're witnessing to other people when it comes to Halloween, because a lot of people have those misconceptions about God. All right, so let's get a better perception here of the world. And hopefully you can use this when you're out witnessing to others on this particular subject. So God made the world perfect. It's because of man's sin that death and suffering came into the world. They're an intrusion, emotional anguish, all this death and suffering. So when you see these pagans that have done this sort of terrible things, and they're looking at sacrifice, and you have Islam and other religions that still try to do sacrifice, the problem is those are an intrusion into the world, and they need to be pointed to the ultimate sacrifice, Jesus Christ. And that gives us something to look forward to, a new heavens and a new earth, no more death or suffering or crying or tears, something to look forward to. Those are great witnessing points when you're out here doing this. But you have to understand the mind of a lot of unbelievers, when we go out there and we tell people a perfect God made a perfect creation, they don't quite get the aspects of the curse that are in the world. Yes, we still see a remnant of beauty and amazing aspects and inspiring aspects. Think of it, it's kind of like this statue here. You look at the statue, you see a lot of beauty and just the workmanship and the artistic merit on it's just amazing. And then you see a kid come up. What are you talking about? It looks broken. It's missing the arms. Where's the legs? It's the same sort of thing when it comes to the earth. When we look at the world, we sometimes say, well, look at this beautiful hummingbird, or look at this beautiful canyon, or this beautiful plant, or whatever it might be. Sometimes you need to step back and say, hold on, it looks broken. We see death, we see suffering, we see all these sorts of things. So having that proper perspective can really help in your witnessing when it comes to dealing with other people. We got to point out that God cursed everything in Genesis chapter 3, cursed the ground. He cursed the animals, sentenced man to die. And we even see this in Romans chapter 8. We know the whole creation groans with birth pangs and labors together until now. We see all this groaning in the earth. Of course, we have something to look forward to. Out in the secular world, they have nothing to look forward to. They see death and suffering. They think it's part of the world, and they just think when you die, you're dead, and it's terrible. No, we have something to look forward to. So let's get a more of a timeline of these events. So you go back, God creates everything. Most chronologists put it fairly, maybe 4,000 years BC or so, and people vary on some of their dates in there. I've actually tallied it up as well. I have the tally on my website. Then we have the fall, which happened very quickly afterwards, because it was before Adam and Eve conceived their first child, and they were told to be fruitful and multiply, so it had to happen quickly. So sacrifice begins at that point. We see the flood sacrifices with Noah. We see sacrifices through the Tower of Babel. Just to give you a time marker, Abraham about 2000 BC. We just covered 2,000 years there. And of course, he was going to sacrifice his son, his only son Isaac, whom he loved. And yet the Lord provided a sacrifice for him. Moses gives specific institution rules for sacrifice for the Levites and so forth. Well, then you see the Celts begin to dominate Europe about AD 700. They have a corrupted understanding of sacrifice. We see Christ become that final sacrifice. And then if you follow forward, we have All Saints' Day, we have All Souls' Day, and finally we see the Irish Celts and some of the others bringing Halloween over the United States, starting about the 1840s and leading up to today. So when we have that big picture understanding, that's really helpful, because you have to understand most people are thinking in terms of an evolutionary understanding of the world, and they're not following this type of a timeline. So it's good. Sometimes we have to go back and lay that foundation for them. So Christians, how do we deal with Halloween's paganism? I suggest we need to be discerning right off the bat. That's what we need to do. We need to start training ourselves, train our children, train our church members in apologetics. And when I say apologetics, sometimes it's creation apologetics. Sometimes it's evangelistic apologetics. Sometimes it's general apologetics, dealing with the resurrection and miracles and so forth. But I want to see the next generation really trained on this. And I love that my wife is the administrator for the school here at Answers in Genesis and the Creation Museum of the Ark. And, we get a chance to have our children be trained in apologetics as they go through. That's really neat. It's wonderful. At the same time, we need to be making sure that we preach the good news on top of this. We don't just want to go out and preach apologetics. It's one thing to get somebody to become, say, a creationist, for example, but we want to see people one to the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So it needs to have the foundation and the gospel built on top of it. Of course, we're commanded to go out and make disciples and teach people to observe all things that Jesus has commanded. And even when it comes to the subject of Halloween, we need to be able to defend the biblical aspects of that against this pagan elements and aspects of Halloween that Halloween has become, has been corrupted into it. 2 Corinthians 10:13 says, "But I fear, lest somehow, as the serpent deceived Eve by his craftiness, so your minds may be corrupted from the simplicity that is in Christ." We need to understand that we're in a culture where, yes, we as Christians want to go out and influence the world, but sometimes the world has influenced Christians, especially pews in the church. There's tons of people inside the church. That's almost like the mission field nowadays. It's hard to believe that, but there's a lot of people that have come into the church that they still have very little understanding of the Bible. And I don't say that lightly. Me growing up, I grew up in church, and I knew so little. When I went to college, I couldn't tell you who came first, David or Abraham. So it goes to show there's a lack of apologetics, there's a lack of Bible teaching, and so things are a struggle for a lot of people, even within the pew. Now, just take this and apply it to what's going on in our culture. Out in the secular world, people are being taught this pagan view, this evolutionary story. Remember, that's a pagan view. And man is the ultimate authority on that because they've rejected God as the ultimate authority, so man gets elevated. And that's what the battle is, man versus God. And so we see this battle. This is humanism in its broadest sense. The secular forms of humanism dominate the Western world. It dominates Australia. It dominates the United States. It dominates Europe. When I was down in South America, I saw it dominated down there more and more so. So these secular forms of humanism work very well with the paganism of Halloween. They fuel each other because they're all part of paganism. They're just different forms of paganism. Anytime you see Big Bang, millions of years, or evolution, these are subsets to the religion of secular humanism, or its variant forms, just evolutionism, naturalism, materialism, and so forth. Creation, the fall, and the flood, those are subsets to the religion of Christianity. These are a battle over two different religions in our culture. I've had people say, hold on a second, Bodie, Big Bang, millions of years, evolution, that's science, right? No, it's not science. Science is observable and repeatable. I've got a bachelor's and master's degree in mechanical engineering, material science. Science is observable and repeatable. No one's ever observed or repeated the Big Bang or millions of years or evolution. Those are part of religious statements, not scientific statements. And so when you see all these different forms of secular humanism, atheism, new atheism, agnosticism, even when people say they're not religious, that's a fancy way of saying you're a humanist because you've already rejected God's word and accepted man's ideas, your own ideas, to supersede God. Naturalism, paganism, any of these forms of paganism. And so they work very well together. And I would suggest that as the culture has become more secular, humanistic, more evolutionized with that form of paganism, you see Halloween growing in its paganism as well because they're fueling each other. But yes, even that paganism. Now, deception. The Bible says multiple times, this is talking to Christians, take heed that you are not deceived. Do not be deceived. Do not be deceived. We see this over and over again. And I think that's important because Christians can be deceived. And sometimes we can get deceived into certain things. Some of these aspects and elements of paganism, and one of the most common is evolution. Evolution, millions of years, and a lot of those concepts. See, trick. See the little evolutionary progression as they go up. Ding, 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 ding. We have to watch out for it because sometimes this stuff is very clever. And sometimes it's in ways we don't even realize. For example, if I were to go to church and start talking about, say, the tree of life, a lot of people might say, oh, yeah, tree of life. That's right back there in Genesis chapter 3. There's the tree of life, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You see it in Genesis chapter 2. We also see it in the book of Revelation. But you know what? You go into a lot of classrooms nowadays, you say the tree of life, they don't think of the Bible. You know what they think of? They think of Darwin's tree of life. And this is what they're thinking of. And I've talked to students before, and I'll say the tree of life. I have to stop. I have to clarify what I mean by the tree of life. And so we're seeing kids of the next generation in particular really be drilled with the secular worldview. It's not really a tree of life anyway. It should be called a tree of death because that's really what it is in the secular worldview. You have to have massive amounts of death to get onward and upward evolutionary concepts to reach all the way up. So this paganism in our culture is just dominating, particularly the kids of the next generation. Proverbs 11:36. But he who sins against me wrongs his own soul. All those who hate me love death. Now, I love this part. All those who hate me love death. We're in a culture where people are they're obsessed with death. When you see news items, it has something to do with someone dying. It's terrible. We see these terrible atrocities. That's what makes the news. It's rare to see good news make the news. Isn't it terrible to think that? But that's the state of our culture. In an evolutionary worldview, in that form of paganism, the secrets of evolution are time and death, according to Carl Sagan. You have to have millions and billions of years of death, pain, struggling, suffering to lead up to man's existence. They look in the fossil record and they say, look, it's millions of years of death, pain, struggling, suffering. This is what you have to lead to an evolutionary worldview. Now, of course, as Christians, we look at the rock layers as an evidence and testimony of the flood, a judgment upon sin. Of course, we've had rock layers since the time of the flood, but most are from the flood. But relate this now to paganism. Look at some of the ancient paganisms, some of the Baal worship or some of the ancient Celtic beliefs, what the Druids were holding up. Guess what? They both opposed God's word. They both tended to love death. Proverbs 8:36, all those who hate me love death. The secrets of evolution are time and death. You have to have all that time. You have to have all that death. In a modern paganistic worldview, death is the hero. That's no different from the ancient forms of paganism, where they had all these different sacrifices, did all these terrible things. This one here in the middle is what the ancient Druids would do. They would stuff people in there, throw oil on it, and light it on fire. It was terrible, the things that they did. But in these ancient pagan worldviews, death was the hero as well. It's no different, really, from the modern evolutionary understanding of it. 1 Corinthians 10:20. Now, I imply that what pagan sacrifice they offer to demons and not to God. I do not want you to be participants with demons. And when we look at Halloween, Halloween glorifies in the death. And so that's one of the biggest problems. We see these aspects and elements of paganism, the glorification of death, instead of a proper understanding of sin, sacrifice, as it left the Garden of Eden, went through the flood, went through the Tower of Babel. It's been corrupted and paganized. But take heart, Christ has conquered all this. And so as Christians, when we're out witnessing, we can have this joy and we can have this peace about this when we're talking to other people. And I'll tell you, it is an issue in our culture. Is paganism dangerous today? Yeah, actually, it still is. I mean, we saw all sorts of examples in the past, even in recent times. But here was an Oregon shooter. This was back in 2015. He lined up his victims, then found out which ones were Christians before shooting them execution style. He was a pagan, proud to be a pagan. Under the religious views, Mercer, the shooter here, said that he is not religious, but is spiritual and interested in pagan and Wiccan. What I found fascinating was when he lined up these Christians, he said, oh, you're a Christian? Well, you're about to see God. And for someone who claimed to not be religious, to say God didn't exist, here he was acknowledging God. Even in his heart of hearts, he could not hide the fact that he did know that God exists. He was suppressing that knowledge, as Romans 1 says. Proverbs 8:36, all those who hate me love death. 1 Corinthians 15:26 says, the last enemy that will be destroyed is death. Death is an enemy. It is a bad thing. And I think a lot of people recognize that death is a bad thing and that they just don't have the proper understanding of sacrifice and what Christ did to get a better understanding of the sin-death relationship. And of course, as Christians, we've got the answer to all this. I've already mentioned it a couple times, but there'll be a time when there's no more death. We look forward to that, and we want to share that with others as well. So how did our culture, our modern culture, get so paganized? Well, I would suggest because people have rejected God and his word, they've elevated their own thoughts. This is what we saw back in the book of Judges, Judges 21:25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own eyes. We're in a culture today where people they pick and choose what they want. They set their own morality. They think that truth is relative. And of course, are they absolutely true on that? No, there goes to show it's refuted. Titus 1:15 says, to the pure, all things are pure, but to those who are defiled and unbelieving, nothing is pure. But even their minds and conscience are defiled. We see this in Romans 1. Although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. Romans 1 continue, even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a debased mind to do those things which are not fitting. 2 Corinthians 4, 3 and 4. But even if our gospel is veiled, it's veiled to those who are perishing, whose minds the God of this age is blinded. And of course, that's a title for Satan here. 2 Timothy 2, 25 and 26. Hopefully, by preaching to people humbly and in kindness here, if God perhaps will grant them repentance so that they may come to know the truth, come to their senses, escape the snare of the devil, having been taken captive by him to do his will. You see, people have been given over to Satan. That's essentially what's happened. Their minds are blinded. They're debased. They can't think properly. Now, what do debased minds do with the knowledge of God? They paganize it. They destroy it. They warp it. They mess it up one way or another. And this is what we've seen historically, and this is what we see nowadays. Debased minds, they can't think right about true history, so it gets distorted. Moral issues, they distort it. Sin and death, they distort it. Christ, God, they distort him. And of course, we see paganized creator legends all over the world, paganized creation legends and flood legends and Tower of Babel legends. Why would we not expect a paganized version of sacrifice since the time of Noah? Yeah, it's exactly what we see. Psalms 118:8 or Psalm 118:8. It's better to trust in the Lord than to put confidence in man. And yet we're in a culture where people are trusting man over God and his word. So we have to deal with that when we're out there preaching Christianity and when we're preaching to people on Halloween. Well, they dealt with paganism in the Old Testament. We see that in Leviticus. We see that in Deuteronomy. In fact, Solomon's wives, many of them were pagan, and they led him astray, so much so that Nehemiah here says, nevertheless, pagan women caused him even to sin. Here's Solomon with all that wisdom, and he still fell short. They had to deal with paganism in the New Testament. We see that in Galatians. We see that in Corinthians. They were led astray by pagans. Now, what I love about this passage in 1 Corinthians, though, is that you were once the pagans. They got saved out of the paganism. That should be exciting for us because we know that even though people have been just tarnished with this paganism and an evolutionary worldview, that pantheistic worldview, hey, people can get saved out of it. Now, we're not just seeing the evolutionary worldview explode. Here in the United States, I'm sure it's like this over in the UK and other parts of Europe, maybe even other parts of the world. We're seeing other forms of paganism be reinvented and come back. We're just seeing more and more of that sort of thing. So we need to understand, yes, there's a lot of forms of paganism out there, but Christ can conquer all of them. And so we can have that confidence when we go out. But there's also modern paganism. They had it in the Old Testament. They had it in the New Testament. They have it now. We see the paganization of Christmas. We see the paganization of the resurrection. We see the paganization of the U.S. and the UK and you name it. For example, St. Nicholas has been corrupted into Santa Claus. He's the keeper of the naughty and nice list. He can be everywhere at all the same time. They're taking godly attributes and trying to apply it to a godly man to come up with a mythological figure. Easter bunnies, same sort of thing. It's terrible to see that sort of thing. In the year of our Lord, if we look at, in the United States, we have 4 organic laws. We have what's called the Declaration of Independence, the Northwest Ordinance, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution. All 4 of those mention God or the Lord. The Constitution here mentions the Lord. All 50 of the constitutions in the United States, they all mention God or Christ just openly. I mean, we saw this over and over again. And now there's this big push of, oh, no, you have to keep all aspects of God out of politics and that sort of thing. And it's like, well, that's not what the founders had in mind. And it's the same sort of thing. You go back at a lot of ancient documents in the UK, there's a godly heritage that's in there. And yet we see that paganized in today's culture. We see a paganization of the rainbow. We see a counterfeit rainbow being used by a whole host of people out here in the LGBT movement, for example. But paganization, you fill in the blank. It's all over the place. It is all over the place. So we need to recognize our culture is largely paganized. It's just a different form of paganism than what they had to deal with in the New Testament. So should Christians involve themselves in Halloween? This is the big question. This is the one that I get all the time. And, I've chatted with a lot of Christian leaders and pastors and said, hey, what should we do? How should we think about this? What should we recommend to people? And first thing I want to encourage you to do, by the way, is consult with your local church. What are the options that you guys can do locally? I think there's a lot of power in that. Obviously, we need to avoid the pagan practices. these pagan aspects and elements. Now we got to be discerning about that. We need to keep those sorts of things out. I've had some Christians say, well, let's take it back. Let's start explaining to people what sacrifice is and the sin-death relationship. Yeah, go for it. Yeah, that's awesome. That's one way to do it. Some people are trying to avoid it. I thought, well, I don't know if you can actually avoid it because, we go into any grocery shop here. They got all sorts of Halloween decorations and pagan stuff. They'll pass out little stickers with witches on it and things like that. I remember our kids getting those sorts of things like, all right, well, let's have a talk to the kids, teach them how to be discerning on these things. So it's tough to avoid it. It really is. Some offer alternatives like harvest festivals, for example. Praise God for the harvest that we get. Some people do Reformation Day in honor of the 95 Theses being nailed to the door saying, hey, let's get back to the authority of the Bible. Some Christians are doing trunk or treat. That's becoming very popular over here in the United States just because of pins and poison and all sorts of stuff. At least kids can come and they take a trunk and they decorate. They get all the cars out in the parking lot. They decorate their trunks up and kids go around there and they get candy that's very safe. And, those are actually becoming very popular. I've seen a lot of churches do this good, and I've seen a lot of churches not do this very good. When they do it good, they bring their kids in. They're talking about the gospel. They really get that message out. They're passing out tracts. There's all sorts of little things that they can do. That's the kind of stuff that I like to see if we're going to do something like a trunk or treat. I've seen people just decorate things up. It's as pagan as anything. They come through, they do it, and they leave, and there's absolutely no Christian teaching whatsoever. There's no push for the gospel. There's no evangelism. You're like, you have this huge opportunity and you just let it go. That's just frustrating. Seen some people do prayer meetings. The point is, there's a lot of options. There's a lot of things that we can do, but I want to make sure the gospel is front and center in all of it. That we've got to make sure that we're preaching the gospel, whether it's to the kids, whether it's the teens, whether it's the adults. We need to reach out to them. This is a great opportunity. I've had people say, hey, Halloween, that's Satan's day. Let's just stay away from. No, it's not Satan's day. All days are God's days, including Halloween. That's a great time to witness. Halloween is a unique time. Think of it this way. We're in a culture where people tell their kids, don't take candy from strangers. Don't talk to strangers. Don't go up to strangers' house. Don't dress up and be weird. And then on Halloween, all of a sudden you're like, yeah, go dress up something weird and go get candy from strangers and go out at night. And it's so the opposite of what we would normally do. So, I've had people say, well, is it okay to dress up? Is it okay to do that sort of thing? If you know what, I have no problem with my girls dressing up like a princess. I don't see anything wrong with it. If a little boy wants to dress up like their favorite reformer, go for it. If they want to dress up like Ray Comfort, well, they already come in Ray Comfort sizes for the kids. The thing is, there's nothing wrong with dressing up. In fact, when you look at the Bible, there were certain times where people had to be dressed up. When people were working at the temple, they had to wear certain dress attire. So there's different occasions to wear different things and have some fun with that. I just want it to be respectful. Don't go out there and do a zombie ghoul and blood shooting out. Try not to follow after the world. We have to live in the world, but let's not be like the world. So I think we need to be discerning on those. Friends, I'm pretty much run out of time here, but I would like to tell you a little bit about my ministry, biblicalauthorityministries.org. You can find me on the internet there and go there, bookmark the page. I have a new lead article almost every day of the week outside of weekends. We, again, have those little booklets, a biblical and historical look at Halloween. I do have a DVD out there. Of course, those are going extinct. They're going to be next to the dinosaurs at some point. But you might still be able to find some of my DVDs floating around out there here and there. I have a book with Ken Ham called A Flood of Evidence. We're looking at a lot of those rock layers, the ark. We're looking at, does it take millions of years to form coal and oil? No, it doesn't. We can actually make those things quite quickly. You can make a fossil in 24 hours. It's amazing. But a powerful book on that. Again, that book, The Tower of Babel. I need to remember my audience. In the United States, we can say it Babel or Babel. So sorry if you guys have to translate that in your head every time you heard that. Glass House, Shattering the Myth of Evolution. Looks at those evolutionary arguments, natural selection, mutations, missing links, the origin of life. Isn't the human and chimp genome 98% similar? No, it's not. What about chromosome 2 fusion? A lot of kids, particularly in high school and college, they're being drilled with these arguments, and these are direct responses to that. How do we know the Bible's true? What about the miracles, the resurrection, and so on? I do have a book on the fall of Satan. It is pretty powerful. It looks at a lot of the events going on in the Garden of Eden in Genesis chapter 3. That tree of life, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Man will return to death. Christ's body did not return to death. to dust. There's going to be thorns and thistles. Jesus had a crown of thorns. There's so many connections between the fall and the gospel. Of course, I have a talk on Satanism, which is becoming more and more popular. That's out there, and that's associated with the cult. And in one sense, it's kind of like paganism. It's also like a counterfeit of Christianity. Confound the critics. How do you take a lot of this information and actually respond to people? This book, I've never seen a book anything like this. Fact is, my friend Eric Hovind, when I wrote it, he's like, "Oh, you beat me to it. You wrote a book like I always wanted to do." But these are actual letters that people have sent. It breaks it down, shows you how to respond. It's an amazing and unique book. And then the last thing I want to tell you about, I was involved in a book series here called World Religions and Cults. We hit over 60 world religions and cults, and we worked with experts from 5 continents to write and review this book set. It is amazing. And there's a lot of forms of paganism in here. And our 3rd volume deals with all these secular religions that are floating all around us, materialism, evolutionism, and so forth. So it is really powerful. I do have a chapter on Satanism that's in here as well. That's pretty powerful. There's a chapter on witchcraft and just paganism in general. So hopefully these will be really helpful resources to get you through when you're dealing with Halloween and those subjects. But John, thank you. And I'll turn it back over to you.
That is fantastic. Thank you so much, Bodie. Thank you so much for putting so much effort and giving us such a thorough and powerful study on the topic of Halloween and giving us a background and going through some stuff. You gave us so much information. Thank you so much. In a minute, we'll open the floor for questions. So anyone who wants to ask questions, please raise your hand through Zoom so I can see you. And while I'm waiting for your hand to go up, I have a question for you, Bodie, if that's okay.
Yep.
Now, Halloween seems quite sinister, where plants, animals, and even people were being sacrificed. That's something you mentioned. And I have a video by a UK Prime Minister saying that these things are still happening today in the UK on Halloween. Now, do you think these things are happening in the USA?
That's a great question. It would not surprise me because there are some cultic groups that, boy, Halloween is their day of days. And I know that there are Satanists and different groups that do certain types of sacrifices. Some of them try to do it in a legal fashion. And what I mean by that is abortion is child sacrifice. And sometimes they intentionally try to do this and do abortions on that day for that purpose. So that was something that kind of opened my eyes when I was doing some research on the Satanism. But there are other cult groups, there are other people out there that do some pretty odd things. I wish I could say no, but probably those things are happening.
I mean, I found a video by a police officer being interviewed who was saying that for sure he believes that sacrifices were still happening today, and they can tell the difference between an animal that was killed sacrificially and an animal that wasn't killed sacrificially. So according to that police officer, at least, he recognizes that they are busier during Halloween than any other time. So it's a pretty sinister, dark period of time, isn't it? I mean, it happens once a year, and every year there are probably bad things happening. Now, the other thing you said is that Halloween is celebrating the Day of the Dead, where they're glorifying death, when it's actually a curse. And you made a big deal telling us death is not a good thing, right? And and paganism is all about glorifying death. So should Christians take part in this celebration, even if it's meant in an innocent way? Should our children knock on doors saying trick or treat? So in other words, I'm not saying what you pointed out wisely, saying that we can make alternatives, we can do things different. But should we do the very same thing in any way? Should be connected closely, like knocking at doors, trick or treat, dressing up, even if it was being dressed up nicely, but knocking at doors and doing these things? How should Christians behave when it comes to the Halloween period?
Yeah, boy, that's that question, and that's where we have to be really discerning on those things. Like the Bible says, we're in the world, but we're not of the world. And if we're doing things that look like what the pagans are doing, our testimony is just ruined. I mean, that's one of the things that need to be stated up front. Like if my girls dress up into a princess stuff, I don't send them out to go do trick or treating or anything like that. We're doing something ourselves. So we're not out there with the world doing that sort of thing. But at the same time, our door is right here. People are going to come knock on our door, and people are going to ask for candy, and we're going to give them some candy, and we're going to give them a tract that little booklet, or, I know there's different tracts from Living Waters. We've passed out some of those, the $1 million bills and so forth. So, I mean, this is an opportunity to witness. And so we have to remember that, yes, it's a dark day, but at the same time, it's also one of God's days. All days are God's days. The whole earth is the Lord's, everything in it. How dare the pagans have this? Let's go out there and let's preach the gospel, and let's make sure that comes through front and center. That way there's no confusion at what we're doing. We're out there preaching the gospel during that time.
Yes, as you said, it's a very suitable time for evangelism. People should have tracts ready, should have a little pack with sweets. And it's the only time of the year where people are knocking at your door and they want something. They want a treat, is what they're saying. So the best thing we can do is give them the gospel along with other things that they can enjoy having. So we're not trying to be stingy or mean to the kids, but we want them to get the gospel. We want them to receive the message. That's the most important message. On the Day of the Dead, on the day they're celebrating the dead, we're going to show them how to receive life. And put one of your booklets on there. How is that?
It's interesting. One of the things we would do, we would get a little, like the little Ziploc bags, the little baggies, and we would make sure there's a lot of candy in it, and we'd put the booklet in there, and we'd zip it. So when we throw it in their bag, they get a few little things here, and here. But when they see that one, they're like, "Oh, that one's a good one." All of a sudden, that booklet's a lot more important because that's these people are cool. It's the way that they're looking at it. So
to be honest with you, I should have been a little bit more prepared and show you the actual pack we make that we sell for people, and however many sets they want, pre-packed, ready to go. Apart from the sweet. Ready to go with crayons and drawings and books and so on. So, I didn't have that with me to show everybody, but they can get that. Maybe you can have that prepared in the future. People can just order them pre-made. Bodie, what do you think?
Who knows? Yeah. If Ray has some of those, I might be able to put a link right over there pretty easy. So,
yeah, I don't think he's got it. I think this is our own unique thing.
Oh, it's your own, yeah.
So I think Ray's behind us on this one.
Yeah.
We've got a hand up by David. So, David, please go ahead.
Hey, Bodie. That's a good presentation. What would you say is the probably sort of top tips you'd recommend in terms of turning a conversation? Because you invariably you get in the UK, you get, hey, why are you Christians just being so difficult about this thing? Why can't you just go with the flow, just take it easy, get back in your box, What would you recommend in your experience would be a great way to turn that round and bring?
Well, there's a couple of things. That's an amazing question. I'm glad you actually asked that question because there's a number of things that you can do. One is the ask method. Just don't be afraid to ask them questions. A lot of people are more than happy to talk about what they believe. Obviously, they don't agree with you as a Christian, but what do you believe? Tell me what you believe. And that opens a good door to say, hey, all right, now we can have a conversation here. Another thing that you can do, because sometimes people, they don't really want an answer. They're just trying to shut you up and, And a lot of conversations go like this, a Christian and a non-Christian. The Christian asks some questions and the non-Christian asks the Christian some questions and they try to defend, they try to give some answers, and then they walk away. And the Christian walks away going, boy, I hope I did good answering his questions. That guy's like, wow, I really put him on his back heels. And that's how a lot of conversations go. I like to do something else, and it can be stressful, but they get up there, they're asking some questions. You need to pull the rug out from underneath of them. And, I pointed this out to the audience on Tuesday is, I've had a number of atheists come up, and one of my favorite questions to ask them, especially when they're being quite belligerent or they're kind of attacking, is I ask them why they're wearing clothes. Clothing is a 100% Christian doctrine that comes out of a literal Genesis chapter 3. In Hinduism, there's no reason to wear clothes because it's monistic. Clothes aren't real. In an atheistic worldview, these evolutionary worldviews, you're just an evolved animals, squirrels, cockroaches. They don't get up and wear their clothes. So that's an amazing way to get people to stop and go, why do I wear clothes? And this has happened a few times, but my favorite is the guy at the Creation Museum. He was very hostile, and I asked him that, and finally he's like, because it's cold out. And I just immediately came back, and I'm like, oh, so when it warms up, you don't wear clothes. And he had no idea what to say. He had none. And see, that's a way of saying, I want you for the first time to look at your own foundation. You're standing on sand. I'm standing on a rock here. You're standing on sand. Let's get down here. We keep talking up here about these little aspects of Halloween, or this aspect of missing links, or this aspect of death and suffering, which are powerful. These are great arguments. But when you can pull that rug out from under them, they have no basis for it. Another one that I think is really powerful is, okay, let's think logically about this, and you can start off by saying that. Let's think logically about this. Why would logic exist in a materialistic worldview? Because a lot of people are atheists, and if they're an atheist, it is built on materialism. In other words, everything is nothing but material, matter and energy, nothing spiritual. Otherwise, God could exist, and you can't be an atheist anymore. But at the same time, that means logic can't exist, knowledge can't exist, truth can't exist. None of those things can exist. In fact, Dr. Greg Bahnsen, many years ago, this was back in the, I think, 1980s, maybe they're in the early 90s, he had a debate with Dr. Gordon Stein. Just to give you an idea, Dr. Gordon Stein and Dr. Richard Dawkins were the two most famous atheists in the world. Gordon Stein he actually had a number of books where he general edited with a whole bunch of atheists. I mean, he was a top dog. And yet today, if you say famous atheists, you can get a list of 50 people, nobody's heard of him. Because what happened is he met Greg Bahnsen in a debate, and Greg Bahnsen pulled the rug out from under him so far he was speechless on the debate. And Dr. Stein, he was a great debater. He went out, he used to debate Christians and leave them in the ashes because they didn't know how to answer him. One of the things that Bahnsen pointed out was that the sheer fact that you showed up at this debate meant you're wrong, because your worldview can't account for logic, knowledge, truth. Boom, he pulled the rug out from under him. He said, basically, what's the mass of logic, if I can put it in layman's terms? And Stein realized he had no answer, and he never could answer. They actually wrote letters back and forth up until Gordon Stein died, and he never could answer that question. The point is, if I break this down, there's a lot of ways to talk to people. Sometimes if they're nice, if they're kind, you can have a good discussion, ask them what they believe, and go from there. And of course, you can lead that into an evangelistic talk in any way. If they're pretty belligerent, that's where you got to pull the rug out from under them. Some of those types of questions get people for the first time to think about their own religion. A lot of times they don't even realize they have a religion until that point. Those are just some tips and tricks. There is the Answers book series, volume 1, 2, 3, and 4. I cannot remember. It's either volume 2 or 3. There is a chapter in there on good questions to ask evolutionists. Dr. Jason Lyle and I think it was Mike Riddle. They put that chapter together, and I edited that one. And there are some great questions in there if you want some really good ideas of questions to talk to some of these guys about. Get some thinking about things. And a lot of that can be done in a fun and enjoyable way, too. So,
cheers, buddy.
Yep.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much. I think we are missing a trick when it comes to Halloween. People are talking about death, right? Mm-hmm. They're celebrating death. So the obvious question would be to ask people, what do you think happens after someone dies? It seems the trick we're missing here, right? So somebody brings up Halloween, somebody asks a question why we're not celebrating. Whatever it is, it's an invitation to have a conversation about Halloween and what it represents. I normally tell people, look, it's a very sinister time of the year. Bad things have happened during that time, and you're celebrating it even though you mean it innocently. But would you celebrate Hitler's birthday even if it was meant in an innocent, fun way? And most people, I've got it on video. I can show you, people can go on there and type Halloween and look for it. And of course, the immediate response is, no, we wouldn't. We wouldn't celebrate. And in what supposedly is an innocent, fun day on Hitler's birthday, because we know that Hitler was not a good man who killed a lot of people. And yet they're willing to do it for Halloween, where they did sacrifice and probably still do sacrifice lives and animals and humans and so on. But the theme is on death. So all we've got to do is say, well, what do you think happens after someone dies? Well, you obviously believe in death. You obviously believe something happens. So what is it? What do you think happens? And then we take them through the gospel and show them that they need a savior. So it looks like Halloween is a great time for evangelism, a great time to talk to people, a great time to approach them, even if they criticize us, just like you said. But the opportunity of continuing, the opportunity of being able to give the gospel message that you would normally not have an opening like that. That opening would normally not exist. You have to initiate it, but they're initiating it for you. What an amazing...
Right. Yeah, that's right. Like, you don't go up on Valentine's Day and be like, hey, what happens when you die? You want to talk about death today? But yeah, Halloween's a great time for that. It's a wonderful, I'm sure you could probably get away with that on Friday the 13th or something too. But those are unique times where we can have those pretty serious discussions. And I think that's a powerful way of doing it. Good call.
So it can be used, but probably not to celebrate it the way they do. It's to me, the comparison for me would be, if you see somebody sinning, you don't join in with their sin, right?
Right.
But it's an opportunity to talk about it. And it's an opportunity to straighten things out. And also the churches, in my view, just like you said, can do alternatives so that people can still enjoy that time of the year, because all days belong to the Lord. They cannot have a day. It's not theirs.
Yeah.
So,
the Lord actually blessed me with a beautiful alternative in our family, because my youngest daughter was born on October 30th. So all of her little cousins and friends all get to come over and can dress up for her birthday and not have to go out and do Halloween kind of stuff. So it really is. I mean, we're just like, oh, no, we're not doing that. We're going to a birthday. And
that's brilliant.
We get to have fun with that. The Lord kind of opened that door for us. Like, oh, yeah. Hey, thanks for that.
Yeah, all you got to do is invite the rest of us. Then we can all take part of this blessing.
That's right. I can give you a tract and everything when you come.
That'll be amazing. I want to clarify something. You traced Halloween back to Noah. So you're saying that Noah legitimately sacrificed animals after the flood, thanking God for saving them and doing the right thing by offering sacrifices. And it looks like, from what you're explaining, because this is a worldwide event, that everybody's doing it, it had to be before the Tower of Babel, in which case it would have been a follow-on from whatever Noah was doing at the time, but completely distorted the meaning. Rather than looking at death as a curse, they started looking at it as something they glorify. So I thought that was fascinating that you went all the way back to Noah to make the connection there. That was very interesting.
Yeah, and other scholars have done that as well. So it wasn't just me. When I did the research, I'm like, oh, wow, this goes all the way back there. And then I find out all these other scholars had already done it. So I reinvented the wheel, if it were. But one of the things that I thought was fascinating was even before the flood, when it's talking about Abel and his sacrifice, it says in the course of time. So it's basically like a time marker. This was something that was done at the proper time. And, whether it was a yearly sacrifice, was it twice a year? I don't know. But there was definitely a repetitive event of this happening. And so when Noah offered the sacrifices, it was probably right there in line with that. Interestingly, later on, the Lord selects the Day of Atonement for the Jews to do their sacrifice. And the Day of Atonement, according to the Jews, goes all the way back to the very first sacrifice back in the Garden of Eden. So that's why they've suggested the 10th day of that first year on their sacrificial calendar as being when the first sacrifice occurred. That's why Archbishop James Ussher actually put it on the 10th day of creation. He has to follow mankind on that day. Whether that's true or not, we simply don't know. But even that day of atonement is right there around the same time of all these other days of the dead, which is quite interesting. Of course, God always gets it right, but everybody else can mess that up. Or depending on their calendar, they shift it around too.
That's interesting. I heard you say that on Tuesday as well, where James Ussher worked out that it must be in the 10th day after creation where Adam and Eve fell. So they didn't get much of a go, really. They failed almost instantly.
Right. They fell very quick. I actually had a lady come up to me because, I don't know if it's the 10th day, but I had a lady come up to me in my audience once and she's like, 10th day. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. And I was like, okay, it does. Why does it make a lot of sense? And she's like, well, because of a woman. And I'm like, I don't know. I don't know what you're getting at. And she's like, okay, a woman's cycle for ovulation is 2 weeks in. And so she said, if Adam and Eve had perfect bodies, they should have had no problem conceiving on the first try. So, her argument was, well, then it had to be before that 2-week period from Eve's creation. So it had to be within that. 10 days is within that. She's like, that makes sense. And I said, I'm a guy. I don't think about those things. I said, you're brilliant. So I just thought, well, yeah, okay, I guess there is that possibility in there. But, like I said, it's still something we don't know for sure about.
That is very funny. But I was just wondering whether it could be a year and 10 days or 10 years and 10 days. I mean, I was just wondering whether that would be a possibility rather than being exactly on the 10th day. It's a year and the 10th day, because every year they're celebrating it every year on the 10th day. So it could be any one of the years, but on the 10th day. Maybe the day is right, but maybe not the year. That's what I was wondering. Yeah,
the problem that we run into if we start putting that out for a long time is, Adam and Eve were told to be fruitful and multiply. Did they take a year? I don't know. That's possible. Or did they say, okay, well, let's have children? It's a perfect world. Everything's perfect. I mean, I don't think they expected anything bad to have happened, at that point, because there was nothing bad. That doesn't mean they didn't understand the concept of good and evil and that sort of thing, but they didn't have an experiential knowledge of that. So, yeah, I mean, those are good questions and fun things to ponder for sure.
That's very interesting. Maybe they just wanted to go do more traveling. I'm just kidding.
Let's go check out this garden. I always wonder, how big was the garden? Was it like 10 miles by 10 miles? I mean, it could have been huge,
That is a good question. Nikki's got her hand up. Go ahead,
sure.
Nikki.
A question. So, or a thought that I had. So you trace back Halloween and Dia de los Muertos and all these events back to Noah's Ark and the sacrifices made afterwards. Couldn't that actually be used as an argument again for the Bible, for the veracity of the Bible? Because there's so many people that say, yeah, it's a good book and just morals, but they're just stories that have no foundation or anything. But if you can trace that back again, and you could actually use that as an argument that the Bible is true, that the Bible is the Word of God.
Right, yeah. These guys, they're just borrowing from the Bible, and then they corrupt it. We see this over and over again, like the corrupted creation legends and flood legends. So, yeah, I mean, that's exactly what's happening. We can go back and say, hey, this is the true account. This is what really happened. Here's why sacrifice exists, because of sin. There's a direct relationship between sin, human sin, that is, and animal sacrifice. So I think, yeah, you can use that as an argument to say, yes, the Bible, it's true. It explains this. It explains why. It also explains why they corrupt it, because we're in a sin, cursed, and broken world. So, yeah, I think you can use it for that sort of thing as well, yeah.
Yeah, you did say something very interesting. You've connected paganism directly with beliefs like old earth and evolution and so on. Are you saying that in the same way Halloween is a pagan belief and that we're mixing it with Christianity because we're not being biblical? So are you saying there's a connection between believing in Halloween and believing in these other things that you mentioned, like old earth and evolution?
Yeah, well, Christians oftentimes mix their religion in a lot of different ways. Let me give you an example. When I went down to Peru, there's a lot of Catholicism that was down there. And one of the things that I would see when I was down there is they would have, all their Catholicism, but then they would set up some of these other little gods, some of the local pagan gods. And that was even in some of the Catholic churches. There were some big, amazing, immaculate buildings. We would go in there and they would have statues of Jesus and Mary, and then they would have some of the local pagan gods. And it was very odd to me. I'm like, what are you doing? You're taking the local religion and you're mixing it with your Christianity. And so at the same time, we had people from Peru that came up to the United States, and they were visiting all these different churches, and they were like, what's going on up here? All these Christians are taking their Christianity and they're mixing it with Big Bang and evolution with this other religion. Why are they doing that? It's really weird. But see, we've all kind of grown up with that. So it's kind of around us and we don't sometimes spot it. And so when we see the evolution of millions of years, this is part of an entirely different religion. And so when Christians grab some of that and they borrow it and they want to bring it over and mix it with their Christianity, they're mixing two different religions. And yes, because evolution is, a lot of times people don't think of it this way, but it is pantheism. It is a form of paganism. What Christians are doing are mixing it. Now we think of the Old Testament, people would mix the Baal worship or the Moloch worship or so forth. And God would be very upset with them. Like, what are you doing? And we read it in the Bible and we're like, guys, what are you doing? But we look in our own culture and here it is. And it even influenced me to a degree. I was struggling with some of the evolution of millions of years. And it took me to step back and go, hold on a second here. I shouldn't be mixing these religions. So these are entirely different religions. So yeah, there's aspects and elements of that. And so when it comes to, say, Halloween and some of those pagan elements, when Christians go over and take those pagan elements and bring it over, they're doing the same sort of thing. They're trying to mix it. And like I said, I grew up in a household that did some of that and they didn't realize it. So, I'm not critical to Christians who have done that and maybe they have no idea that, oh, that's part of a different religion. That's part of paganism. Sometimes they just don't know. And so the key is doing some research on that and being discerning then.
It's very interesting that you brought that topic up. I mean, I've done talks on Halloween and never connected the age of the earth and evolution together like that. It was very interesting to hear how you pointed out that all these practices are paganistic in nature, and that by simply adopting it, we're celebrating paganism in some way. Very interesting there, Bodie. Thank you for that.
Bodie, thank you so much for the talk. For me, this was kind of special because I'm from Bolivia, actually.
Oh.
So a lot of the things that you talked about, paganism is so, and the Day of the Dead is so rooted in my culture. It's crazy. I did write a few things down, so please bear with me because it's a little bit. So the first thing that I wanted to mention is, like you said, like Bolivia does have Dia de los Muertos, and we do celebrate it in like 3 days.
Okay.
It's similar to Peru, but it's like very obvious when you are a Christian on how much it's mixed up with so many things. Like one of the things that it's like, I would say it's divided in two aspects. First of all, it's the aspect of worshiping the ancestors, which we do like they do like a little bit like in Mexico. They prepare a table for when the dead come to visit. So again, this is and they bow down to the ancestors that come to visit for those 24 hours window. And in that case, it's like just you're breaking, of course, the commandment that you shall have no other gods, because you're bowing down to the ancestors. And at the same time, I can see how demonic it is, because you are actually not talking, because people do start talking to, or what they think they're ancestors, but they're actually demons that they're talking to. And you can see with all of this, like, because this is so ingrained in the culture, because the culture that we have there is called Andinismo or Animismo, which is, again, pantheistic, because they believe in Pachamama, that's Mother Earth. So they do, you can see the paganism there, that they do worship the earth. This all comes from the pre-Inca culture, Cotiwanaku, and it's very ingrained. And as you said, people are very Catholic at the same time. So you do see all of this mixed up with Catholicism and with their paganism. So the thing that I wanted to mention, which I really found crazy, is that all of this culture is represented by the Huipala. And the Huipala is a flag it's not a rainbow flag, but it does have the same colors, and it's supposed to represent the indigenous people in my country, but it actually does represent more of the Andinism and Animismo, like this paganism.
Right, the religious aspects. Yeah.
Exactly, because that's actually what the people are about, because you do have so much, that's what the tourists come to see. There's a street called La Sagárnaga, which is actually called the Street of the Witches, La Calle de las Brujas. And you see all these these llama fetuses, and you can actually buy like packs to do rituals, to do sacrifices. And this is completely ingrained in the culture, because my mom is an architect, And every time that she had to, where she was constructing a building, she had to, like, her workers needed to sacrifice this lamp or bury it underneath the building. So every house and every building in Bolivia is actually built up on some type of sacrifice. And the bigger it is, the bigger the building is, the bigger the sacrifices. And we actually do know that there are many, like when there was 3 bridges that united the city of La Paz. When they were built, people kind of knew that there were human sacrifices. So what they do is they get poor people drunk, and they get them so drunk, and they actually bury them under these buildings. So there's so much demonic. It's horrible. Yeah. There's so much demonic influence with this Andenism and paganism. But what I wanted to say about this flag is 3 years ago, when I met Patricia Igler, you know her, right?
I do.
I met her in one of the conferences with John in the UK, and she actually came to Germany to visit because she wanted to go to Berlin. So I told her, come to visit me, and we traveled together to Berlin. And she was doing the whole Marxism study. And it was crazy because we went to the University of, to the part where Marxism, like philosophy, I think it was the philosophy department, but exactly that day that we went on a Saturday, there was a huge march going on and a huge like protest. And it was actually a Marxist from a leftist march that was going outside. So people were like waving the communist flag and the Marxist flag. And for me, what was astounding is that I actually saw one person with this Huipala flag, which represents the indigenous and Andenism and paganism culture. And this is a flag that is really just like a Bolivian thing. So I did talk to them and I asked them, why are they there? And it's even though it looks like 2 different things, but it still is so ingrained, like even paganism and Andenism, it's amazing how it still follows and it is represented in this new type of Marxism that's going on. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, thank you for that, actually, Nikki. And thanks for filling us in on some of the details of, the way the Day of the Dead and things are done there in Bolivia. I saw some of that similarly in Peru when I was down there as well, and a little bit in Mexico when I was down there. So yeah, it's there's different practices and wow, that's pretty crazy. Some of the stuff that's out there, even in our modern culture, it's sad to see that sort of thing.
And the thing is, as a Christian, I can see all of that, but my mom is a blind Catholic. And I'm saying a blind Catholic because every time I try to talk to her about the Bible, she just like shuts down. It's more of a traditional Catholic, but she doesn't, even as somebody that kind of should know, she doesn't really know the Bible, and she really doesn't see how this Andenism and paganism does actually clash with what she is supposed to know about the Bible.
Yeah. Well, I encourage her to read it. Just, if you can get her into the Bible, Word of God never comes back void. So encourage her to do that.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Nikki, for that. Appreciate it. In the UK, not many Christians, thankfully, would subscribe to the idea of Halloween. They would actually recognize that as being an evil thing.
Yeah.
So my question is, what about those Christians? There's few Christians that actually don't see it that way. I know that in America, it's a bigger deal. It's a much bigger deal. Many more people would celebrate Halloween and consider it innocent. Is there such a thing as celebrating Halloween innocently? Children dressing up, in their frightening clothing and knocking at people's doors, saying trick or treat, taking sweets. Some people are saying, well, it's all innocent. It's they don't mean to celebrate the Day of the Dead, and they mean it well, and they're just having a bit of fun. I want to hear your opinion on this, Bodie. What's your response to that?
I would say over here in the United States, we do have a big mixture. We have a lot of Christians that recognize, ooh, that's bad. Let's be very discerning on this sort of issue. I've talked to some Christians that say, yeah, I recognize that there's the pagan stuff. Let's take the good out of this. For example, the trunk or treats or the Harvest Festival or even Reformation Day. And I've seen people say, oh, let's do dress up, but we're not going to do like the gory, terrible pagan type of, like let's not dress as witches and ghosts and stuff like that. Instead, they dress up like their favorite reformer, or they dress up like a princess, or they can dress up like Ray Comfort. They automatically come in kid sizes. I mean, I love Ray actually.
That was brilliant. It was very, very funny.
But I don't see anything really wrong with that sort of thing if they're doing it, with a good taste and that sort of thing. You do have to, of course, be careful of, hey, we're going to dress up like witches and warlocks, or go out and do some, dress like I'm going to be a zombie, going to go kill people, or do terrible things, or they want to go sacrifice things. Or, you have to be very discerning on that. Now, here in the United States, you do have some Christians who I think they're not familiar with the subject. And so when I say that some of these guys may do this innocently, it's because they simply don't know. To them, they see Labor Day, they see Memorial Day, they see Thanksgiving, they see Christmas and Easter. To them, it's just one of those days on the holiday. Well, what do you do? Oh, we got a day off from school, or we're going to go do the, okay, what are we going to dress like and go hang out with our friends? But they're not doing it in a sense of they're intentionally trying to do any form of paganism. They just don't know because they're just not familiar with it. And, I think a lot of times, those are the kind of Christians, they say, hey, well, let's talk about this a little bit more and talk about the roots and what's going on here and some of the alternatives that you could do. I think a lot of those guys would be open to it because they're just not familiar with it. If somebody's like, yeah, I get that it's pagan. Yeah, I go to church, but I'm going to do it anyway. Well, those people probably already made up their minds. They're probably not one to be discerning or want to be teachable on that subject anyway. So, you just have to be discerning on who you're talking to and how you have to talk to them. Of course, there's various ways to evangelize, and sometimes evangelism is required within the church. Sometimes there's people sitting in the pews who they don't really believe they're there. They're curious, or maybe they've grown up with it. But, we see that a lot here in the United States. People have grown up with Christianity because their parents are Christians and their grandparents are Christians, but they in their hearts are actually gone. And they still need to be evangelized and be taught the truth of the gospel. And Holy Spirit needs to touch our heart on that. So, we still need to keep all that together, I think. But like I said, we have a big range over here. And, one of the things that I try to do, I try not to be judgmental when I'm talking to somebody, because I need to meet them where they're at on that issue and then talk through it and go from there. But, I'm quite gracious when I chat with people on those kinds of issues.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you very much. Go for it.
All right.
Thank you, John. Bodie, I love this presentation. So overall, what from this, what you've shown us, Halloween it can be neutral, but how you celebrate it is either pagan or holy, because as you were talking about, that concept of Halloween can be traced back to Noah, right? That the original sacrifice, right? Adam and Eve, and they wore something, and that tree is God's mercy. So today we could kind of correlate that to today, where we could dress up, right? It's like this day of sacrifice, right? We could dress up and getting a candy, right, from trick-or-treating. That can also be in a biblical sense that can relate to the Bible, right? Like how Jesus sacrificed, right? We're covered and we got a treat, eternal life. So overall, I guess what I'm really asking is, Halloween is neutral, but who celebrates it is good or bad, right?
Yeah, in one sense, I see what you're saying on that. What we need to understand, big picture, right off the bat, is these pagans, it's not their day at all. It's actually a Christian day, and it always has been. All the days are actually Christian days because Christ is king over all. He's King of Kings no matter what, even on Halloween. Now, what's happened is the pagans have taken the good understanding of sacrifice. They've taken in a good thing, and they've paganized it and destroyed it. So it's not actually theirs. So what they've done is they've warped it, they've deviated. And what we need to do as Christians is take it back from them and say, hold on a second here. You don't have a basis for sacrifice even within your own pagan religion, because your pagan gods have never revealed to you that you should be sacrificing in the first place. Nor does any of your pagan gods ever reveal to you the way you should be living your life. Whether it's Wicca, whether it's Greek mythology, whether it's evolutionary worldview, none of them have a God that revealed to them a book of what they should do and what they should believe. So we need to pull that rug out from underneath of them. And I see no problem with that. I love to use what's called a presuppositional method, where you basically point out that, hey, within their own worldview, they can't make sense of the world. They must borrow from a Christian worldview. In this case, they're borrowing from sacrifice. They're borrowing from sin. They're borrowing from death, but they have incorrect understandings of that. And it's good to point that out. In their worldview, they don't even have a basis to wear clothes. That's a Christian concept. I once had a guy, this was back when I was working at the Creation Museum. He came in and he started yelling at one of the bookstore ladies. And when I mean yelling, like he was blue in the face and just top of his lungs. Somebody called me up, hey, get out here. We have a hostile guy. I opened the door just to go out to the museum from where my office was at the time. And I opened the door and I could hear him. And this is a long ways off. I was like, whoa, oh my. So I go up there and I get in a conversation and he turns to me and he's just yelling question after question. What a king and his wife? What about dinosaurs? There's no God. How dare you? He wouldn't even let me talk. He wouldn't let her talk either. I think our bookstore stuff, I think she could have answered most of his questions, but he wouldn't even do it. So I had to wait for him to run out of breath. And he finally ran out of breath. And he goes to take a big breath. And when he did that, I asked him a question really quick. I said, why are you wearing clothes? Because he was preaching evolution, that there's no God. He was an atheist and so forth. I asked him, why is he wearing clothes? And he stopped for a moment. And he had no idea how to answer. I said, listen, I got up this morning. I drove in. I saw some squirrels. They didn't get up and put their clothes on. I'm like, why are you wearing clothes if we're just evolved animals? And he just stopped. He had no idea how to answer. And he said, finally, he's like, because it's cold out. And I said, oh, so when it warms up, you don't wear clothes. And he's like, oh, he had no idea how to answer. And I noticed he had a wedding ring on too. And I said, hey, I noticed you have a wedding ring on. And the first thing he said to me, it was like a softball question that he gave to me. He's like, listen, I'm honorable to my wife. And I said, that's very Christian of you. And at that point, he had no idea what to do, because here he was espouting a religion, and I just pulled the rug out from under him. He had no basis to wear clothes. He had no basis to be married. Those are Christian doctrines that come from a literal Genesis. We wear clothes because a literal Adam and a literal Eve literally sinned, and we're literally shamed for it. And God gave us clothing to cover that shame. And I explained that to him. And I said, listen, I want you to keep your clothes on. I want you to be honorable to your wife. But I want you to understand, within your own worldview, you can't make sense of that. You have to borrow from a Christian worldview. And I'm right up front about that. It's the same sort of thing with this paganism. They have no basis to deal with death. They have no basis to deal with sacrifice. They have no basis for any of their pagan practices. They keep borrowing that from a Christian worldview. So what I think is good is we need to be able to point that out and say, hold it, these guys are borrowing from a biblical worldview. Let's pull that rug out from under them and give them a proper understanding of sin, death, and the relationship there, and how we then point to Jesus Christ, who solved that problem. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an answer on that.
I personally don't think that taking part in Halloween is our way to say we're reclaiming it, as in go and do what they do. You don't do what the sinner does in order to point out to him that right. The world belongs to God. Obviously, we keep away from things that are evil, we keep away from things that would be otherwise celebrating a principle that we don't agree with. But that doesn't mean that day belongs to them. We use that day for God's glory. So, and we can do whatever we feel we want to do, but as long as we don't make them feel that we're taking part in their own evil works. So that will be my take on it. But it's such an amazing opportunity that I think people are missing out on, and people should use that in order to bring the gospel. What a fantastic day. This is the only time of the year when we actually give them a pack, they thank us for it. It's really funny because in our neighborhood, they know exactly what they get. And every year they're very happy to come back and get some more. So I'd like to encourage everybody to do that. You connected paganism and Halloween with older excuse me, he connected it with old Earth, Big Bang, and evolution.
Mhm.
Something that not many people would see the connection there. I thought that was very interesting that paganistic beliefs leads you to believing in such things, but of course, in the eyes of the world, they're believing in science. The irony of what they're believing in. So I thought that was really interesting, and maybe we'll get you back to do some talks on that. How do we know the Earth is young? How do we know the Big Bang is false? How do we know evolution is false? All of those things. You probably need a whole lecture on each one of those individually. But maybe we can tackle those for people to help them know how to defend their position and to explain why we know these things are not the case. With a word of warning, though, I mean, I sometimes get caught up in these things, and I find myself more interested in winning this argument than I am interested in winning their souls. So instead of going for the gospel, I tend to dwell too much on these things and then find myself taking up so much time that they leave without the gospel, and I realize that I failed rather than succeeded. I might have come across very clever, very knowledgeable, maybe even convincing a little bit, but I certainly left him go without the real message he needed to hear. So, but nevertheless, we need to be equipped, don't we?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you're right, though. There's a lot of people that don't have that connection between the evolutionary worldview being a pagan aspect and element. You know, if we think back to Acts chapter 17, Paul was arguing with the Epicureans and Stoics, and we see what all happens there at Mars Hill. A lot of people don't step back and go, well, who were the Stoics? What did they believe? Who were the Epicureans? What did they believe? If you look at those Epicureans, they were the evolutionists. They didn't believe in a whole bunch of gods like some of these other Greek myths. They believed there was no God, that everything evolved from tiny particles that they called atoms. That's where we get our modern term atom. So really, the evolutionists today are just rehashing the Epicurean pagan myths that were back in the days of the Greeks. It was largely extinct for about 1,800 years till Lamarck and Erasmus Darwin resurrected the idea. Erasmus Darwin is Charles Darwin's grandfather, by the way, and he actually wrote a book on Lamarckian evolution. So you can see some influence in there to Charles. But yeah, I mean, it's a pagan belief that's come and gone, and now it's back with a vengeance, and it's all over in our culture, sadly.
That's very true. So before we let you go, and thank you for this wonderful study, just remind people again where they can find you. Are you on YouTube? Are you on Facebook? Are you on Instagram, TikTok? Where are you, and how can they find you?
All right. The easiest way to find me is my website, biblicalauthorityministries.org. Again, that's biblicalauthorityministries.org. Please bookmark it. New article all the time. I am on Facebook. You just search for Bodie Hodge, Biblical Authority Ministries, so it kind of clarifies. Bodie Hodge, Biblical Authority Ministries. I'm hoping to do a YouTube channel here in the near future. That's something that's in the works, but I haven't got that full blown yet. I've got 3 kids that are still running 17 directions on the same day. I don't even understand how that is. I got to go to volleyball practice and pick my girls up here in a little bit. So there's a blessing in that, but it also slows you down doing some of the ministry sometimes. But be praying for that I can get YouTube going. But those are my primary outlets.
It's been a privilege. Thank you for accepting this invitation.
Yeah.
And hopefully we will be hearing from you plenty more in the future.
You bet.
Excellent.
All right. God bless you guys.
God bless you.